Okay, so it's 2:50 now, so I suppose we'll kick off this session. And I'll just thank everyone again for joining us for this year's LEAP conference and making it through to this final presentation session. So we've got another slot on animal production, and we'll have two interesting talks, again, about different livestock production systems and the role or the potential role of livestock in a more sustainable food system. So our first speaker is Dr. Lisa Norton, who's an agroecologist at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. So if you'd like to start sharing your slides, Lisa, and take it away whenever you're ready.
Can you see those?
Yep, that looks great to me.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks very much for having me along. I've really enjoyed the talks that I've been to already. So I'm going to talk about learning from pasture-fed producers. And my slides are just going to hopefully turn themselves over. Let's see how they go. If they don't, I might have to assist them. So beef production is pretty important for the UK. So we're the third biggest producer in Europe behind France and Germany. And the UK is a really good place for growing beef because grass grows really well here. And we have many farmers with the skills and expertise in production here. Our ecosystems have been managed by domesticated animals for thousands of years, and some of our habitats, valued for their biodiversity, are dependent on cattle grazing practices to maintain them. So much of our farmland has been historically under mixed farming, including some of our most productive land, and cattle manure is an important source of soil enhancement, enhancing both soil, organic matter, and biological activity. However, beef cattle are large animals that take considerable resource to produce, as we've heard lots of times, and they produce high emissions of greenhouse gases. So we need to be sure that production of these animals is optimal. But what is optimal? Optimal breeds for maximal weight gain in as short a time as possible, or approaches which aim to maximize ecosystem, animal, and human health whilst keeping happy farmers in business. So the SEEGSLIP project, Sustainable Economic and Ecological Practitioners, Ecological Grazing Systems, Learning from Innovative Practitioners, was focused on learning more about the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, the PFLA, and their approaches to try to understand what they offer and whether such an approach could provide a future direction for livestock systems. So the PFLA describes themselves as a membership organisation in the UK that champions the unique regenerative role of ruminant animals and the grazed habitats that they've evolved alongside. They have their own certification standards to enable producers to market their produce as grass-fed only. And they were particularly keen to be involved in this research to understand what the scientific evidence says about their practices and what they may be able to do better. So the project took a survey approach, including both ecological survey, soils and vegetation, and social surveys on around 60 farms in total. And the social surveys included both detailed management surveys using something called a public goods tool designed to gather information on things like agricultural practices, farm economics, but it also included farm chats like this one here, both at the kitchen table and whilst walking around the farm. And these were aimed more at understanding more about farmer motivations and mindsets. So using comparisons with data from a national countryside survey, our ecological findings revealed that PFLA grassland was more species rich and contained more broadleaf species than intensively managed grassland. And the vegetation was also typically quite a lot taller on PFLA farms. And this combination of taller and more species rich vegetation is likely to be positive for wider biodiversity. Soil properties, in particular soil carbon, were not statistically significantly different to those of more intensively managed grassland. So our interviews with farmers showed the farmers that the sort of walk-talk interviews showed them to be a really proactive bunch looking to provide positive change from within the industry. They are themselves changing as individual farmers, paying much more attention to their land and livestock and thinking more broadly about their role, including considering their part in the food chains, how best to market their produce and how to remain viable. So the farmers that are actively engaging with one another through what they label a brilliant forum, which is like a community of practice. And they're also interacting with researchers and through social media with lots of farmers from across the world. So our economic analysis showed that these farmers are definitely viable. Comparisons with farm business survey margins showed that while performance was variable, PFLA averages were well above farm business survey averages for suckler cows and comparable or slightly better for sheep. And key factors influencing this were that they have minimal inputs and therefore costs associated with them, including tractors, etc., as well as the actual products. And they also have direct sales, so they're cutting out the middlemen. So our overall analysis indicated that those farmers who have been PFLA members for longer tended to have higher environmental measures, vegetation diversity and soil carbon, than more recent members. We did also talk to consumers as part of the project, because they're obviously another part of this food system. And we found that while some choose specifically to buy PFLA meat directly, most people had never heard of it. Although a lot of them do think seriously about what they consume, and they admitted to making assumptions that those who buy their meat for them, the supermarkets, essentially, are making the right choices for them. Sorry, not they don't buy their meat for them, but where they buy their meat from, they are assuming that the supermarkets are making the right choices in what they're stocking. So while we weren't able to carry out any analysis on meat quality, separate work carried out by Gillian Butler at Newcastle University at the same time as our project looked at meat quality from a couple of the farms which we were also looking at, and they compared it to shop-bought organic or conventional meat. And that study found that PFLA meat from those farms was of higher nutrient quality than either of those other meat types in terms of omega fatty acids. So I've just tried to capture more than 3 years' work in just over 5 minutes, but I want to say that this is really difficult science to do. So thinking holistically and looking at real, highly variable farms over a relatively short period of time doesn't get you the Nature papers. Reductionist approaches, which cut out all the reality to get a really clear answer, have contributed to us having an agriculture which is based on very simple productivity equations: X fertilizer equals Y crop. But if we want transformed farm systems that focus on food systems rather than on production alone, we're going to have to accept that the farming of the future needs to be much more complex, that it needs to be place and person, farmer specific, and that the science that will help us to evaluate it properly and influence it needs to be similarly complex. It certainly needs to be interdisciplinary, and it preferably needs to be long-term. So that said, I believe that this study does start to provide the evidence that low input farming with more than just production in mind, as the PFLA are doing, can deliver a wide range of public goods and be economically viable. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that really excellent talk, Lisa. One question kind of jumps out to me following many of the other things we've discussed over today. So you suggested there's some emerging data that, yeah, as we might have expected for various reasons, that the grazing systems are better from various ecosystem measures than intensive grassland systems. But what about the comparison against non-agricultural land uses? And does the PFLA have a consideration of, okay, we want to farm in this way, but is there still a recognition of the wider competition for land use? And okay, maybe the whole landscape isn't going to be pasture, and there are other non-ag purposes that people are calling for.
They do understand that, and I think they feel under a great deal of pressure for that. And many of them are considering, for example, agroforestry as part of their system. So there's no reason that we have to have large woodlands. We could have agro-pastures, silver pastures with some trees in, and animals in, and grassland in. And a proportion of these farmers are conservation grazers. So they already manage a lot of our nature reserves, well, not just the PFLA, a lot of farmers are managing a large areas of national parks and nature reserves by grazing in sort of beneficial ways for biodiversity. So I think there is scope for sharing. Sorry, I shall stop my share. There is scope for sharing land with animals and still retain and still having more semi-natural systems, and we already do that, and that could be extended further, I think, with trees as part of that equation. But yeah, maybe there are other areas where we could have bigger woodlands as well, and they do recognise that pressure.
Okay, I see we have a few questions here as well. So the first one here from Niels Corfield is asking, do we have any data for atmospheric concentrations of methane in pasture in grazing operations?
It's a really good question, and I know Niels, and this is an area I think the PFLA would really like to see studied more. We know that cows produce methane. I think there are some very early data looking at cows in grassland, and it doesn't. A lot of the methane seems to dissipate into the surrounding grassland. So there isn't. Although we know that there's methane issues for greenhouse gases, and we know that cows produce methane, I don't think there's a fantastic bit of research looking at exactly how what comes out of the cow goes into the atmosphere, and that's because it's really difficult to do. So there is a real gap there, and we really do need to understand how cows in different systems, how that gas is actually going into the atmosphere, and whether it's going into the atmosphere perhaps in some cases.
Yeah, I guess I might chip in there quickly, Niels. If you look up eddy covariance, you'll see the types of measuring stations that we can plop in a field and try and estimate, and when we can detect that there is higher methane coming off where there's grazing nearby, so that methane is being produced and being added to the atmosphere, but we don't have a particularly
quantitative.
we don't have very good coverage of these measuring stations, and there's more work to be done in kind of making sure that the bottom-up emission estimates match the top-down actually monitored emissions for methane. I don't think we're quite there yet.
It'd be really interesting to see any papers for you to put links in. I think for people will be interested to see that.
I'll try and track some down.
Thank you.
From Emma Garnett is asking, what are the yields, kilograms of beef per hectare, of these 100% grass-fed PFLA systems in the UK? And also that there seems an assumption that pasture always has better or higher biodiversity than arable. Anecdotally, this is not my experience. Are there any data on this?
Two questions there. So I don't have to hand figures on the yield from these systems. I presume you mean comparative yield per unit area, perhaps. But I can't just pull that out of the air. I do know that there's a lot of rhetoric around the longevity of producing cattle from these systems, but I do know that they can and usually are produced in a very similar time frame to more conventional systems, and a lot of the farmers are really seeking to maximize their grass use efficiency, so they're looking at rotational grazing systems that are more effective than set stocking. But in terms of the diversity of these systems compared to arable, if you go into a conventional field of wheat, you'd be lucky if you could find a couple of weed species at the base of those wheat crops. But if you had an organic wheat system, that would be very different. And similarly with these systems, many of them are organic, they're very low in inputs, so they are more diverse than your average grassland system, which typically, if it's a sown grassland, would just be ryegrass and, if you're lucky, some clover. So yeah, I agree. These grassland systems can be really not very biodiverse at all, and we have a lot of them. So having the potential for farmers to have much more biodiverse systems that still make them a living is for me is really exciting. I'd really like to see those grasslands, those monoculture grasslands changed.
Okay, and I think we have time for this one last question from Harriet Bartlett, asking what level of subsidy do these pasture-fed systems have? Are they profitable without them?
Yes, they are. Some of them are subsidised because they're in agri-environment schemes and conservation grassland. And actually, I would say that a lot of these farmers are going ahead without the government, because they kind of feel that the government are behind the curve on what's needed for change in these systems. It's going to be very difficult as farmers lose their basic payment for any farmer to be productive. Almost all of them are very heavily reliant on those payments. Our food is massively subsidised through that system. But I think that those farmers that are doing it, have been doing it a while, have found a good way of producing, an effective and efficient way of producing, are managing some of them without any subsidies apart from the basic payment. That's a whole new story coming, I think, how that's going to impact farming.
Okay, well, thanks again, Lisa, and thanks for those detailed answers there. We'll move on now to our next speaker, Dr. Paula Amiron. So Paula is a food systems researcher at the European Institute of Innovation and Technology Food, or EIT Food. And whenever you're ready, Paula, please take it away.
Thank you. Okay.
Yep, that looks great, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so my name is Paula Amiron. I'm the Partnership and Funding Manager at EIT Food North West. We work for Iceland, Ireland, and the UK geographies. We are here to present some results of 2 workshops that we developed this year. The topic is how can the livestock industry help to achieve net zero targets? So we developed these 2 workshops with the objective of identifying potential solutions, available and current solutions to the livestock supply chain in Ireland and the UK to address climate concerns. We did this workshop with KTN, and two members of the team were from KTN and 2 members were from EIT Food North West. We did a co-creation process with different stakeholders from the industry, but also from the academia, governmental organizations, and non-governmental organizations. And we use different interfaces, not only Zoom and breakout rooms and conversations, but also mural. We did a first part with these processes, working individually and also in groups. And then we started working in a first draft. After that, we did a second session. And finally, we are working now on the final white paper. How did we do this? We work on 3 different axes: the environment, the socioeconomics, and also the innovation. And we work in different stages, challenges, solutions, and we are now in the recommendations stage. So if we have to go through the challenges, we found many points that were related with the policy and the politics. The policy and the politics that need to support and reward farmers, but also the consumers. We also found some lack of standardization on the metrics and also on the inventories that we have. So I'm going to go through the solutions because we have 7 minutes. So if we go, we are going to go through 3 different parts: policy solutions, innovation solutions, and funding solutions in the following 3 slides. So in the policy solutions, we found that benchmarking farms in groups with similar farming systems could help, and also integrated supply chains to reduce waste and lower age at the slaughter. We also need to change our mindset to farm for carbon sequestration instead of reduction. The policies should be science-based, also based on reward, on incentives. And we need a plan that it should be one plan integrating the government, but also the industry. And also we need the collaboration with other industries that do not work directly on livestock. Regarding the implementation we need a change of behavior, and for this we need also again the rewards, not only for farmers, and we also need benchmarking farms. I think that this was mentioned before. We need demonstration, we need behaviors to be mimic. And regarding data and calculations, it was said many times that we need blueprints for data collection and also fairness in inventories and common instruments. On the funding and investment, there was mentioned many times a need to invest in research in the area of carbon capture and storage, and also to complete the research on methane mitigation strategies. Again, to know the socioeconomic consequences of farming for carbon sequestration, and a need to look at how farmers can monetize carbon reductions. Finally, there was another request of supporting the industry-wide genetics research to support to better or to promote a better herd, more consistent in performance. Regarding innovation, in the 2 sessions, it was said that innovation is happening and we have technologies, however, they are not implemented. So we have many barriers at this stage of implementing these technologies. So we need to work on technology adoption and also on best practices to help to repeat these practices in a broader audience. We need to center our attention on the farmers to achieve this. Regarding the process, we need to work on different scenarios, and in this, we need to see how agriculture can become net zero and work on different scenarios on this. And we need to do a benchmark report that is transparent and allow comparisons between systems. Before going to examples, we need to include also the tech sector in the process. Some example areas are grassland management, but also feed formulation and seaweed, to include seaweed in the feed, to work to develop more efficient animals, and also satellite imaging between many other inputs that we have received. I just selected some of them. So if we go to the final recommendations, we need to reduce the age of the slaughter, and also to describe the consequences of this change and all the actors involved, and also to consider the genetics and the nutrition that we are going to give to these livestock to reduce, in the past, to reduce the age of slaughter. We need to consider all the consequences of reducing the age of slaughter. We need a standardization of data, and this standardization of data and metrics needs to reflect on modern genetics and farming practices. some of our participants said that the instruments are not responding to modern genetics, so we need to adapt them. And it needs to be not only useful at farm level, but also at regional and national scale. We need to build a system of reward for farmers. They need to be part of the policy. Of course, they should be incentives and not perverse incentives. Finally, we need to work on commercially relevant demonstrator farms, best practices that need to be shared with different publics of farmers, and also on land management. Finally, the carbon sequestration should include farmers and also the civic society. So they need to understand the global and the complex effects of carbon sequestration. And we need to have clear guidelines for rewarding this carbon sequestration. So this is more or less what we wanted to share. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Paula. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, but I had a couple to be getting on with in the meantime. So it's great to see that there are these kind of specific steps that people want to be taken to improve the sustainability of the food system. But this seems a bit kind of like it was a bottom-up take of what the food system thinks it needs to do. And I wonder if you might get a different perspective from the government or the NGO perspective on what the food system's role in a net zero economy is. So I wonder if you've looked at the different perspectives of what the kind of end goal might be according to the different actors. And I'm especially thinking the food system stakeholders may be simply interested in improving sustainability, whereas NGOs and governments might want more transformational change such that the food system is a net negative through kind of additional land sparing. I think you're muted, sorry, Paula.
Sorry, so in our workshops, we had many stakeholders from the industry. So they all know that the technology is available. However, the cost of being the implementers of that technology is high, and they could lose competitiveness if they do so. So they request a higher intervention from the policy sector that is going to make all of them equal. I mean, it's going to put on the table a regulation that they will have to respond to. So everyone would have to respond to that. So what they need is more regulation, and also the instruments that they are using are a little bit cherry picking. So what they need is to have some standards so everyone can play with the same rules, and we can know what is really happening, because what we don't know is a clear, let's say clear, we don't have the same data, it's not standardized. So it's very difficult to make a real conclusion. So they are asking for some sort of fairness in that process too. And between NGOs and well, we didn't. I think that the industry was quite, it had a high voice in the workshops.
Okay, we have a question here from an anonymous question saying, sorry if I missed this, but with your recommendations around slaughtering animals sooner and making them more efficient, how do you think this interacts with animal welfare concerns? For example, making chickens too big to walk because it's more meat per chicken?
Well, we didn't go through that in detail. So I will take a note of your question and I will discuss that with the team. But we just just, let's say, gather all the perspectives of our participants. We didn't make any judgment on that, just try to understand how the different actors in this let's say, problem interact and how we can make it work. But we did not make any judgment on that.
Okay, and I have one last quick question for you here, which is that we have a few steps that have been lined up there that people want to see, but it still seems a bit fuzzy as to who is going to pay for the R&D and the implementation of them. So did that come up much, and how do you think that issue of the costs will be resolved?
So when you talk with industry stakeholders, they always point to the government when you think about who is going to pay for the research. But we do need, I think that perhaps that could be an option, or perhaps there could be another option that could be some sort of, I don't know, a bank for doing that, a specific fund for that. But yeah, so somebody has to pay for that. So let's see if we have a regulation that is going to, let's say, promote that.
Great. Well, thanks again for your very thoughtful answers, Paula. And let's thank both our speakers, Lisa and Paula there. So I think that wraps up the main content for the LEAP conference. And if you'd all like to now transfer to the final session where Charles will be giving a final summation. So thank you again for joining us.
John, we stay where we are, I think.
Okay, sorry, don't transfer.
So I hope people can hang on just for 2 minutes while I sum up. It's impossible to sum up what has been a really fascinating series of talks. I guess a few things really struck me as themes that run through a number of talks and which I think speak to us in the research community. First, the number of people, both our plenaries and number of speakers who talked about the importance of better data and better standards. And I think this is an area where we in the research community can make a real contribution, even if we're not ultimately the people who collect data from all farms and all production systems. Getting those data standardized, getting those data standards right is really critical. And I think another point, and Mario mentioned this, and it came out in a couple of other talks, is the importance of taking a food system perspective, looking at how the different components interact and trying to anticipate any perverse outcomes and avoid them before implementing change. Another thing that really struck me was just the amount of how great the challenge is going to be to try and make livestock production and the food system in general sustainable. And I think this is an area where there's some real grand challenges for the research community, which I hope will be set up and will be funded. When we do produce meat, and especially ruminant meat, it's inevitable that there is going to be greenhouse gases produced. And so seeing how we can bear down on that and reduce those greenhouse gases, especially the methane, is really important and interesting. And there are a variety of different techniques out there which are being explored at the moment, and we need to know urgently which ones of those work and how they can be brought to scale. And so that to me is an example of a grand challenge on the natural sciences. I think also grand challenges on the social science. We know that diet change is going to be inevitable to get a sustainable food system. We don't know how to do that. We don't know the relative roles of government, of private sector, and of us, the consumers. So we need to have research there, social science research, into what are real theories of change, pathways to get towards we know where we want to be, but we don't know how to get there. Finally, and Mario brought this out, Lisa brought this out as well, we are going to be asking our farming communities, our food producers, to make radical changes over the next couple of decades. And it's really important that we think how that can happen fairly, with just transitions and with a fair degree of equity. And that's particularly important when one goes to low and middle income countries where there are far fewer of the safety nets and the alternative livelihoods that we have in richer in the rich world. So all sorts of really interesting ideas came up over the course of today, and I hope you'll continue discussing them. So the Hoover, if that's correct pronunciation, platform upon which this conference has been taking place, it will be live for the next 3 months. So there will be the capacity there to continue this discussion, and do sort of get people's emails address and contact each other directly. The plenaries will be available on not only on Hoover, but we'll put them on the LEAP website in the next couple of days. But I think all the content will be available on Hoover. Please do now go and look at some of the really fabulous posters that you can access through the exhibitors tab on Hoover. There's a lot of really interesting material there. We are intending to hold a conference in December next year. We'll be in touch with everyone who's signed up for this conference to let them know how that is happening. And we really hope that that will be a hybrid conference so that people can attend in person, but we'll continue having a web aspect to it so people can join from around the world. So let me finish with a few thank yous. Many of you will have interacted with Viola Forbes, who only joined the LEAP team a couple of months back and has just done a superb job in making certain that the conference has worked. So a huge thank you to Viola. I'd like to thank the 4 chairs of the sessions. And then finally, a real major thank you to all our speakers and the plenaries. Thank you very much indeed. And I hope to see you with luck in Oxford, and if not virtually, this time next year. Goodbye.